Well, at the team level, you obviously have the daily stand-up, which creates transparency among the team. And of course, it would be a wonderful tool for a control manager, a top-down control manager, to use the daily stand-up to find out who's screwing up and to punish them. And of course, if the manager uses a daily stand-up for that purpose, then it obviously kills transparency. The daily stand-up will stop having useful information in it. And the same way with the retrospective, a way for the team and the management to understand, well, what was learned, what was accomplished, what was not accomplished, and how could things become better in the next cycle. At the team level, those are well-known practices to enhance and reinforce transparency. At the organizational level, what I'm seeing in the firms and a group of companies that I work with called the Learning Consortium is that they are conducting a lot of their planning meetings in front of a planning wall, where they have, even these large organizations, they have a huge wall with all of the things that the organization is doing set out in a kind of huge Kanban board, if you like, and holding meetings in front of the board and this planning wall. And what they're finding is that although they're still learning how to make the process more effective, what it is in fact creating transparency and conversation in a way that doesn't happen if people are sitting around a table and someone is talking from a flip chart, or someone is talking from a slide, or people are referring to books. Suddenly when you have a team of 5, 10, 15 people and they're milling around the board, then all sorts of different interactions and conversations can be taking place in a way that doesn't happen. So those are three things that encourage and reinforce this transparency, which is an essential element of the whole Agile approach to running an organization. Well, it's a very complex story, and I only have tiny snippets of information about it. I do quote Steve Blank because he is the father of the lean startup movement, who has been involved in the GE. He is, in a sense, in a position to speak. In a 300,000 person organization, there are obviously many different things going on, and some parts of GE are absolutely wonderful. I visited the GE Health Group a couple of years ago, and it was really quite astounding what was going on. And certainly they had a very agile sort of mindset and processes and approach, and their frustration, though, was that they didn't feel that the whole organization was on the same page, and that the organization was notoriously focused on maximizing shareholder value, whereas the Agile movement is all about creating delight for the customer. And so they described themselves as a sleeper cell, an Agile sleeper cell within a huge one. I mean, it was like a quarter or a fifth of GE, agitating for the whole of GE to become Agile. And so there was a lot of talk of Agile at the top level, but it wasn't obvious that the whole organization was oriented to the values of Agile. So as I say, the health group, which is a big part of GE, did seem to be on that track. But the power sector, which was really a big part of GE's performance and a big part of these shortfalls that have resulted in these tremendous changes, didn't seem to be on board at all, and was simply pursuing the same old thing that they'd been doing all along, but just, as I say, carrying out innovation theater. So the this is all about mindset, and unless you change mindsets and unless you actually focus the organization on creating value for customers rather than extracting value for shareholders, I mean, you will eventually have this kind of earthquake that we see with the top management of GE. I mean, unfortunately, it looks like Procter & Gamble might be about to go down the same path because they're under attack from a hedge fund, and now the hedge fund has got a seat on the board, and this is usually a prelude to some major management shakeup, and they had been also pursuing the lean startup approach. So it's worrying for the Agile movement when major Agile implementations like these are seen as not being successful, and it is important that we try to understand the reasons and try to sort out the rhetoric from the reality. I could say immodestly, read my book, but I mean, it is possible. I mean, these organizations that I'm working with in the Learning Consortium, I mean, these are large organizations. They have a combined market capitalization of more than $1 trillion, and they include firms like Microsoft and Ericsson and Barclays Bank and Riot Games and C.H. Robinson and Fidelity Investments and Vistaprint. I mean, these are companies which are all on this journey. None of them has arrived. I mean, you don't really arrive on the Agile journey, and all of them have made tremendous progress, and they are at different places in the journey. I mean, some of them have been going at it 8 to 10 years and pressing ahead with great success. Others have only been at it for a year or two, and they are learning from each other how to do it. So my suggestion is that learning from other organizations is one of the chief and most useful ways of accelerating the journey, because you are able to hear, particularly in the sort of frank environment that we've created in the Learning Consortium, what went wrong and why it went wrong and what is being done about it and what are the future challenges, and you get away from innovation theater and the rhetoric of Agile, and you get away from the big consulting firms which will tell you that if you sign up and have this huge training program with them, all your problems will go away. But of course, very few, I don't think any of these organizations that I'm talking about have heavy involvements from large consulting firms. They've grown it organically from within the firm itself. And typically it happens when you have a movement beginning at the middle or the bottom of the organization, which is then embraced from the top. And when you have that dynamic, then you tend to see the firm get on an Agile journey. But its success isn't guaranteed, as we've seen from the examples I mentioned, and it's a long and difficult process, and it continues. It's not something you finish. The challenges keep emerging. Once you've reached one plateau, you look ahead and you see that there are other plateaus ahead of you. It certainly needs to happen. Where it's still the case that most public organizations profess to be maximizing shareholder value, as reflected in the current stock price, which of course is totally antithetical to the whole philosophy of Agile. So that is certainly a fundamental problem, and it needs to be addressed at the level of the boards of these organizations, but it also needs to be addressed elsewhere. It needs to be addressed by the chief executives. So you do have chief executives standing up and saying that is nonsense, we don't agree. Paul Polman, Unilever, Benyak at Salesforce, Steve Jobs obviously have you have CEOs standing up and saying that is nonsense, we're not going to run the organization that way. But it also needs support from business schools, which have been very slow to embrace this change, and it's the financial press. We have seen articles from Financial Times and The Economist and Reuters calling these bad practices what they are, but you still see those same journals continuing to publish other articles which are less forward-looking. And we also need governmental agencies, regulators, to see that if you have an economy where the large organizations are totally focused on extracting value from the economy rather than creating value, the prospects for the economy are not good. That this is not a way to run a successful economy, and it's now apparent in the sputtering economic growth rates, despite a few upticks in the last year or two. But if you look back last 20 years since shareholder value became dominant, economic growth has been quite meager, and median salaries have stagnated, and these are part of the products, the results of a focus on extracting value rather than creating value. So a whole set of actors who are involved in governance here need to change, need to realize that the track we're on is not a good track. And I'm obviously one of those pushing for it, advocating it, and I hope that others will join the cause, and we can make this societal change. I mean, it's inevitable at this point, because you cannot run a successful society based on extracting value from the economy. You have to have a shift towards creating value. So we might have to have several major crashes before there's a realization of this, but it will inevitably happen if civilization is to continue. We have to make this change. So it's a question not of whether it's going to happen, but simply when it's going to happen.